Well, at the beginning of every case, each party is required to complete mandatory disclosure, which includes a financial affidavit. The reason the courts require mandatory disclosure at the beginning of a divorce is so that everybody is aware of everyone else's assets and liabilities so that they can be divided up equally. One of the only reasons you can overturn a divorce is if somebody failed to disclose something and it didn't get divided. So this beginning process of mandatory disclosure and a financial affidavit is really important. When you're filling out the financial affidavit, usually it begins with questions about your employment, and we put in your income information, and then from there it does a breakdown of what your expenses are. What is your mortgage, your insurance, your taxes, your lawn, your pool, your cable, your internet, all of those things. What is your car payment? What is your insurance payment? What is your health insurance payment? The reason we are doing this is so that if we're contemplating alimony or child support, we know what the expenses are of the parties in order to make this happen. So for example, if you're seeking alimony, it's important to know what your expenses are, have been, and are going to be, because alimony is based on need and ability to pay. So I can look at a financial affidavit and identify whether or not there's a deficit for one spouse that would justify that spouse receiving alimony. In the alternative, if a spouse is the one to pay alimony, I can look at a financial affidavit and determine whether or not there's a surplus that's available for alimony. Financial affidavits aren't always the most accurate thing, but the mandatory disclosure backs up the financial affidavit. So if there are some inaccuracies on the financial affidavit, we will correct them when we're reviewing the other party's financial affidavit by looking at the mandatory disclosure. So for example, the bank statements will tell us the value of certain assets on certain dates, and that's why those are required, so that I can back up what's on the financial affidavit. Ultimately, what we do is we take that mandatory disclosure, we take the financial affidavit, and we create what's called an equitable distribution schedule. That's basically an Excel spreadsheet that tells me all of the assets and liabilities and what they were valued on the date of filing, if that's the date we're going to use, or what they were valued on the date of separation, or what they're valued now. Sometimes it'll have all of that information in one place. But what it'll do for me is create the picture that I need to be able to advise you of how we're going to divide up the assets and liabilities, how many assets we have and how many liabilities we have. And if you have to pay, if you're going to take the house and you're going to get $100,000 from the house, how are you going to pay off that $100,000? Is there another asset that we can take it from that doesn't have a tax penalty? So mandatory disclosure and financial affidavits are the jumping off point for identifying the marital assets and liabilities that ultimately have to be divided. It's a really important part of the process. It's part of the process that we insist be done at the beginning of the process, and it's also the part of the process that's required so that ultimately whatever ruling you receive or whatever marital settlement agreement you enter into is a valid one because you've disclosed everything.